Really, the way I became involved in this was started out in the early afternoon, around probably 1:30 in the afternoon, and I received a telephone call from the mortuary officer out at the Walker Air Force Base, inquiring about what would be the smallest possible casket that we could get that would be hermetically sealed. And at that time, I know that we had used like the 4 feet and caskets. We had used those before, but I thought they also made them in a 3/6. He wanted to know if we had any in stock, and I said no, but if I can make a call to Amarillo, I can have them in, by 7 o'clock the next morning on the truck. So he said, I'll get back to you. And that was the first contact that I had with the base.
And then what?
Then he called back, probably 45 minutes or so later. And he said, I need to ask you some more questions. He said, in case something like this should happen, he said, we need to know what the preparation, what your preparations are for the bodies that had been laying out in the elements, And he said, we need to know also what if your treatments of the bodies are the remains, what could you do to them, and if your treatments, would it change any of the chemical breakdown of the tissues, the blood? Would it make a difference? And I said, I thought probably it would.
This began to seem a little strange to you at that point.
Well, I thought maybe what happened, they might have had a VIP or, some officer and something that happened. They didn't want, wanted to keep it quiet, and they probably wanted to do it themselves, not be involved with the civilian businesses or anything.
So after these conversations, you were curious, and you went on out to the base, as I understand it. Can you review that?
Well, no, I didn't go out to the base. Yeah, I was curious, but I didn't go out to the base, and probably a couple hours later, then I'd got an emergency call. There was an airman that was injured in an accident, and I took the airman to the base. When we got to the base, then he walked into the emergency room. I didn't have to take him in. They didn't bring out a gurney or anything. He just walked in on his own. Then I never did see him after that. Then I had this friend that I wanted to talk to and see. This is a lieutenant nurse that I knew quite well, that had only been there only been commissioned and been out to sign. This was her first assignment to the air base. And I wanted to talk to her, and so I was going down the hall, and first thing, the lieutenant that I wanted to see was coming out of one room, going across the hall to the other, and she noticed it was me. She said, how did you get in here, and what are you doing in here? And she said, you better get out in a hurry. She said, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. She said, would you please leave and get out of here in a hurry? And then I turned around, and she went on into the other room. Then in about the time I turned around, there was another officer said, hey, wait a minute. And I said, looks like you had a crash. He said, I see there's some, in the ambulances out there, I see a lot of wreckage. And I said, where was the crash? And he said, there wasn't any crash. Evidently, he must have waited for somebody else to come out, because there was another officer coming out. He said, this man says there was a crash out at the base. He said he wanted to know he was inquiring about our crash. And this was when I encountered, he was a red-headed officer, and very nasty, very rough. He said, you did not see any crash. There was not any crash. And he said, you get the hell out of here, and you didn't see anything, and you don't talk to anybody. He said, you're going to get in a hell of a lot of trouble. And I said, look, I'm a civilian, there isn't a damn thing you can do to me about it. He said, no, but somebody might be picking your bones out of the sand. That's when he made the remark there. And then there was two MPs that joined me right on, took me outside, and each holding me by my elbows, and they escorted me out to back to the ambulance and followed me all the way back to the funeral home.
Now, as you were entering the hospital, you saw something in 3 trucks.
Yeah, because usually where I parked, there was 3 field ambulances parked in the area where I usually park, where we back up to the ramps. So I just pulled up to the side in front of those and parked out in the front, and the airman and I got out and walked in. So when I got up, went up the steps and up the ramp, and I was walking, going into the emergency room, I noticed that the doors were open, but what was odd about it, there was an MP standing beside each one of the vehicles in the back, just standing there. And the doors were open. Naturally, I was curious, and I just happened to look in. That's when I saw some debris that looked like parts of a plane or something that they hadn't had a crash. Because I've seen them do this a lot of times, bring in pieces and the old ambulances in.
Can you describe the debris?
Yeah, I noticed in 2 of the ambulances there was some debris that was probably 2.5 to 3 feet, long and probably high, that was propped up on the side of the ambulance there. They were kind of in the shape of maybe like a half a canoe. They were like the front part of a canoe. It looked like it might be aluminum, but it looked more like the metal looked more like stainless steel that had been heated. It was blue, kind of a bluish tint to it. And what was odd about it, it looked like around the curved part in the front of the canoe, there was some designs or something. It kind of reminded me of maybe some Egyptian signs or whatever. And the same thing was in the other ambulance, too. Pieces that were practically the same size, and the insignias looked like whatever that might be was part of the wreckage.
How did your friend feel about what she saw?
I kept trying to get a hold of her because naturally I was curious and I wanted to know what was going on. And so I called out the next day, and then probably around 11:30, she said, I know you've been trying to get a hold of me, but I haven't been available. And she said, why don't you meet me at the officers club? If you have time, meet at the officers club and we'll have lunch, and I want to talk to you. So I went on out and met her. She was so upset. She looked like she was, in shock, is what she really talked like and looked like. I said, well, I was just curious. The only reason I want to talk to you, I was curious on what happened. And she said, well, you won't believe it. And she says, I don't believe it either. But she said, I got in a lot of trouble on this thing. And she told me that when I saw her, she was leaving the room to go to the bathroom because she was deathly ill and was going to throw up. So, but she said she walked in the room and they said, hey, we need you. You need to help us. And that was the way she became involved in it. She said, we have 3 bodies. There was 3 bodies. She said 2 of them were very mutilated. One looked like it might have walked out, or that it, might have lived a little while. And she explained they were like 3.5 feet to 4 feet tall. And then she got ill. The doctors also became very ill. They would have to do a little examination, then they'd have to leave and go sit down, and then they would come back and do a little bit more. It was that bad. She said it was the most horrible. I've never been so horrified in my life. I've never seen anything so gruesome in my life. I've never smelt anything that smelt worse in my life. Then she pulled out of a little purse or little pocketbook, whatever she had there. She gave me a little diagram that she had drawn some figures of some arms and face and so on. She told me that this is what, what was in those, that it was a crash. It wasn't an airplane, but they didn't know what it was at that time. Well, the only remark that she ever made was that they definitely weren't humans as we know humans, but they could be from another planet. Or the doctors were explaining this, that they couldn't be from our planet. They had to be an alien, or had to be something else, but not in our planet. She said that, of course, their eyes were set back into the skull. She said their skulls, the doctor said their skull bone structure wasn't like ours. It wasn't actually a bone. It was probably a real heavy cartilage. It looked more or less like a newborn baby. The skull was very pliable. You could mash on the skull and it would, it would give. And so the bone structure, bones not like our bones, it was our skull and everything. The one that hadn't been mutilated to a great extent, it reminded him of a real small ancient Chinese person, no hair at all, and very, very delicate skin. In fact, he said the skin would look like they could almost see through it, almost transparent. The way she explained it and the way she drew it, that the heads were somewhat larger than a human. The lips were just a long, narrow, more or less, not full lips like we would have in most of our people, but very fine lined, very fine lips. There was no teeth. That was the inside of the mouth. It was kind of like a real gums, or maybe it was. She said to explain it, it was almost as hard as if it was rawhide. The ears. There was a couple of small orifices, one on top of the other, with two little lobe flaps, one over the other. They didn't really know if they had any significance, how they worked or what. They didn't go into that. The nose was only a couple of very small orifices, holes right there, just above the lip line. But it had, there wasn't anything covering it. And it was just like two small indentations there, and that was it. Said it was very unusual. There was one hand that evidently wasn't attached to the arm, and she said that where she got sick and left the room was that this doctor had the long forceps and picked the hand up and turned it over, and that's when they noticed that there wasn't any thumb. None of the bodies had any thumbs or anything. They were just long, very fine, very delicate fingers, no fingernails. But right at the tip of each finger, it looked like there was a pad. And in this pad, it looked like it might have had very small they were like little suction cups, but very minute suction cups. The doctors, that's the way he explained it, that was looking at it. We were talking about the wrist bones and everything, and she said it was very similar to ours, but the bones were so small that their bones probably wasn't in the arm, wasn't any larger than my finger. They tried to put it in the morgue. Out at the morgue, they had two refrigerated body compartments that we used to put them in, and then we would go out and get the bodies from there. But they always brought the airmen to us, but on the dependents and everything, we went out for them. But they weren't cold enough, and it became so offensive, they were afraid they were going to upset everybody in the hospital. So they later moved them over to a hangar. And that's the last that she knew anything about them, too. The lieutenant knew anything about them. But she didn't know how they moved it or anything about it, but they were taken to a hangar. Because the odor was so offensive, like they said, it was upsetting everything.
Where the bodies went from Roswell? Did you know where they were shipped out? Did you know where they went?
She didn't know. She never told me. She never mentioned no suggestion whatsoever. She just said that the last she heard, they were in a hangar, and that's all she knows. I never did see her after that. And I called out the next day to see how she was feeling, and they told me that she wasn't available. I called the next day, and they told me that she'd been transferred. And it was rather odd because she'd only been at the base less than 3 months. That was her on commission less than 3 months, and that was her first assignment. So it was rather odd that she would be transferred out, within 3 months. Then about 2 weeks, probably 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks. Could have been a little longer, but I know it was at least 2 weeks. I got a letter. She didn't sign. It didn't have any returned address or anything on it, but inside of the letter, there was just a note. She said, "I don't have time to write. I will write later. This is my APO number." So then I wrote back to her and asking her more or less how she was feeling and why the sudden transfer, and then I hoped that she wasn't in any trouble. It was just a short note. I really didn't go into a lot of detail or anything. Probably a month after that, then I got the letter that I had mailed to her. It was returned. It was stamped return, and also it's in red printing it said deceased. Then I went out to the base a few days later, and I was talking to one of the nurses, and I said, "Whatever happened to the lieutenant?" And she said, "Well, the rumor is that we heard that she was killed with 5 other nurses in a training mission in a plane crash." And that was it.
Do you believe that she's dead?
No, I don't think so. After all that's happening and after, threatening me and everything, I doubt very seriously.